Picture this. You are standing in the bitter wind of the Mongolian steppes in the year 1206 AD, watching as a man who once herded sheep and survived on mare's milk transforms himself into the most feared ruler the world has ever known. The ground beneath your felt boots trembles as thousands of horses thunder across the grasslands, their riders bound not just by conquest, but by a code of laws so brutal and so absolute that breaking them meant death in ways your nightmares couldn't conjure. You witness Temujin, soon to be called Genghis Khan, as he proclaims laws that will govern not just warfare and politics, but the most intimate aspects of human existence. Laws that turned sexual conquest into political weapon, that made rape a tool of empire, and that transformed the bedroom into another battlefield where power was won and lost with flesh as currency. The morning mist carries the scent of burning felt and horse sweat as you realize you're about to witness the birth of an empire built on violence so systematic, so calculated, that it would reshape the genetic landscape of entire continents. This is not a story about military tactics or trade routes. This is the hidden history of how one man weaponized human sexuality and brutal justice to forge the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The man who would become Genghis Khan understood something fundamental about power that most rulers missed entirely. Fear was temporary, but laws were eternal. When Temujin united the fractured Mongol tribes in 1206 AD, he didn't just create an army. He created a legal system so comprehensive and so merciless that it would govern every aspect of Mongol life for generations. The Yasa, as this code became known, wasn't written down initially. It lived in the memories of judges and administrators, passed down through oral tradition like sacred scripture. But unlike religious law, the Yasa was concerned with one thing above all else: absolute obedience to the Khan's will. The sexual provisions of Mongol law were unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. While European nobles debated the finer points of courtly love and Christian marriage, Genghis Khan was engineering a system where sexual behavior became a direct extension of imperial policy. Mongol warriors weren't just permitted to take women from conquered territories. They were actively encouraged to do so as part of their military duties. But this wasn't random violence. It was systematic biological warfare designed to spread Mongol genes across the known world, while simultaneously destroying the ethnic identity of conquered peoples. The Khan's approach to marriage and sexuality reflected his understanding of power dynamics on the grandest possible scale. Traditional marriage, as understood by settled civilizations, meant little to the Mongols. Instead, they practiced what historians now recognize as strategic polygamy, where powerful men accumulated wives not for love or even pleasure, but as living symbols of their political reach. Genghis Khan himself maintained hundreds of wives and concubines, each one representing an alliance forged, a tribe absorbed, or a territory claimed. These women weren't just sexual partners. They were human trophies that demonstrated the Khan's ability to take whatever he wanted from whoever opposed him. But the true genius of Mongol sexual politics lay in their legal framework for rape and sexual violence. While most medieval societies struggled with how to prosecute sexual crimes, the Mongols eliminated the problem entirely by making rape legal under specific circumstances. When Mongol forces conquered a city or defeated an enemy army, the systematic rape of women became not just permissible, but mandatory. Warriors who failed to participate in these mass sexual assaults could face punishment for disobedience. The Khan understood that sexual violence wasn't just a byproduct of warfare. It was a weapon that could destroy enemy morale, eliminate bloodlines, and create generations of mixed heritage children who would be forever caught between two worlds. The Yasa contained explicit provisions governing the treatment of captured women that reveal the calculated nature of Mongol sexual violence. High-ranking women from conquered territories were often forced into marriages with Mongol commanders, creating a class of unwilling wives whose primary function was to legitimize Mongol rule over their former subjects. These marriages weren't ceremonial gestures. They were carefully orchestrated political theatre designed to demonstrate that even the most protected women in enemy society could be claimed by Mongol power. The psychological impact on conquered populations was devastating. If their queens and princesses could be taken as war brides, what protection could ordinary women expect? Lower-ranking captive women faced even worse fates under Mongol law. They were distributed among the warriors as rewards for battlefield performance, with the most beautiful or skilled women going to the most successful fighters. But this distribution wasn't random. The Khan's administrators maintained detailed records of which women went to which warriors, creating a bureaucratic system for sexual slavery that operated with the same efficiency as their military logistics. Women were categorized by age, beauty, skills, and social background, then assigned to warriors based on their rank and service record. This systematized approach to sexual violence meant that rape became just another form of military discipline, with women's bodies serving as the currency for rewarding loyal service. The enforcement mechanisms for Mongol sexual law were as brutal as the laws themselves. Women who resisted their assigned roles faced punishments that included torture, mutilation, and public execution designed to terrorize other captives into compliance. But the Mongols also understood the power of positive reinforcement. Women who embraced their new roles, who bore children to their Mongol captors, or who demonstrated useful skills, could earn elevated status within the Mongol hierarchy. Some captive women eventually became trusted administrators, translators, or even military advisors. This carrot-and-stick approach created a psychological dynamic where survival depended on active collaboration with the system that had destroyed their previous lives. The breeding programs implemented under Mongol law represent perhaps the most chilling aspect of their sexual politics. The Khan recognized reproduction meant that controlling the future. Mongol law required warriors to report the pregnancies of their captive women to military administrators, who maintained detailed genealogical records tracking the mixed heritage children born from these forced unions. Children born to Mongol fathers and foreign mothers occupied a special legal category that granted them certain privileges while ensuring their loyalty to the empire. These children became a new class of imperial citizens whose mixed heritage made them ideal administrators for governing conquered territories. The scale of this genetic engineering project becomes clear when we examine modern DNA studies of populations across the former Mongol Empire. Researchers have identified genetic markers indicating that millions of people across Asia carry DNA traces from Mongol ancestors, with many of these lineages tracing back to the 13th and 14th centuries. The most famous example involves Genghis Khan himself, whose genetic legacy can be found in an estimated 16 million men across modern Asia. This biological footprint represents the success of Mongol sexual policies in literally reshaping the human population of entire continents. But the Mongol approach to sexuality wasn't limited to conquest and forced reproduction. Their laws governing sexual behavior within Mongol society itself were equally revolutionary and brutal. Adultery among Mongols carried the death penalty for both participants. But the definition of adultery was carefully constructed to protect male privilege while restricting female autonomy. A Mongol man could have as many wives and concubines as he could afford, but his women were forbidden from any sexual contact outside their assigned relationships. The punishment for female adultery involved public execution methods designed to serve as spectacle and warning to other women who might consider challenging male authority. The Mongol legal system created a hierarchy of sexual privilege that extended far beyond simple gender distinctions. High-ranking Mongol men enjoyed nearly unlimited sexual access to women within their households and captured territories, while lower-ranking warriors faced strict regulations about which women they could approach. The Khan himself stood at the apex of this sexual hierarchy, with legal authority to claim any woman within the empire as his own, regardless of her existing marital status or personal preferences. This ultimate sexual privilege represented the clearest possible demonstration of absolute power, showing that even the most intimate aspects of human life were subject to imperial authority. The enforcement of these sexual hierarchies required an extensive network of informants and administrators who monitored compliance with Mongol intimate regulations. Every felt tent, every temporary camp, every conquered city operated under the watchful eyes of officials whose primary responsibility was ensuring that sexual behavior aligned with imperial law. These sexual police possessed authority that would have shocked even the most authoritarian medieval societies. They could enter private dwellings without warning, interrogate women about their intimate activities, and impose immediate punishment for violations of sexual protocol. The psychological warfare embedded in Mongol sexual law extended beyond the immediate victims to terrorize entire populations into submission. When Mongol forces approached a city, messengers would often arrive first, carrying detailed descriptions of what awaited the inhabitants if they resisted. These messages weren't military threats in the traditional sense. They were explicit catalogues of the sexual violence that would be systematically inflicted on every woman in the city, from the youngest girls to the oldest matrons. The descriptions were so graphic and specific that many cities surrendered without resistance, rather than subject their female population to the horrors that Mongol law made not just permissible, but mandatory. The Khan's personal involvement in crafting these sexual policies reveals the calculated nature of what might otherwise appear to be random brutality. Genghis Khan didn't simply allow his warriors to commit sexual violence. He actively designed systems to maximize its psychological and political impact. The timing of mass rapes was coordinated with other aspects of conquest to create maximum trauma and social disruption. Women were often assaulted in front of their families, creating layers of humiliation and helplessness that destroyed traditional social bonds and authority structures. The legal provisions governing the treatment of pregnant captives demonstrate the sophisticated cruelty of Mongol reproductive policies. Pregnant women from conquered territories faced different fates depending on the stage of their pregnancy and the perceived value of their unborn children. Women in early pregnancy might be forced to undergo primitive abortion procedures to eliminate non-Mongol bloodlines, while those carrying nearly full-term children could be kept alive until birth, then executed after their babies were weaned. The children born from these circumstances were raised as Mongols, completely severed from their mother's cultural heritage and trained to serve the empire that had orphaned them. The administrative apparatus required to implement these sexual policies rivaled the complexity of Mongol military organization. Scribes maintained detailed records of every woman's reproductive status, tracking menstrual cycles, pregnancies, and births with the same precision used for military supplies and troop movements. These records served multiple purposes, allowing administrators to predict when women would be available for sexual service, to monitor the genetic mixing that was central to Mongol imperial strategy, and to identify any attempts to hide pregnancies or deceive officials about reproductive matters. The economic dimensions of Mongol sexual law created markets in human flesh that operated with ruthless efficiency across the empire. Women were traded between military units based on their perceived value, with complex pricing systems that factored in age, beauty, skills, and reproductive potential. The most valuable women could be worth more than horses or weapons, creating incentives for warriors to compete not just for military glory, but for access to the most desirable captives. These markets weren't hidden or shameful aspects of Mongol society. They were open, regulated institutions that operated under imperial protection and supervision. The religious implications of Mongol sexual policies reveal how thoroughly the Khan understood the connection between spiritual and physical domination. Many of the conquered territories practiced religions that emphasized female modesty, sexual purity, and family honor. By systematically violating these principles through legalized rape and forced marriage, the Mongols attacked not just individual women, but the entire spiritual framework that gave meaning to their victims' lives. The message was clear: neither gods nor human institutions could protect women from Mongol power. The training programs developed for Mongol warriors included explicit instruction in sexual violence techniques designed to maximize psychological damage while minimizing the risk of killing valuable captives. Young warriors learned not just how to fight and ride, but how to systematically break the will of captured women through carefully calibrated combinations of violence, humiliation, and false kindness. These techniques were as much a part of Mongol military doctrine as archery or cavalry tactics, passed down through generations of warriors who understood sexual violence as another tool in their arsenal of conquest. The long-term consequences of these policies extended far beyond the immediate victims to reshape entire societies for generations. Communities that survived Mongol conquest carried the trauma of systematic sexual violence in their collective memory, creating cultures of fear and submission that persisted long after Mongol forces had moved on to other targets. The children born from forced unions lived as constant reminders of their community's helplessness, occupying ambiguous social positions that reflected their mixed heritage and violent origins. The Mongol approach to controlling female sexuality among their own people was equally systematic and brutal. Mongol women enjoyed certain privileges unknown in many other medieval societies, but these freedoms existed within carefully defined boundaries that reinforced male authority and imperial power. Women could own property, participate in trade, and even hold administrative positions, but their reproductive choices remained strictly controlled by law and custom. The message was clear. Freedom existed only within the limits defined by imperial authority, and those limits were enforced through violence when necessary. As the winds of the Mongolian steppes carry away the dust of conquest and the echoes of ancient screams fade into history, we're left with a sobering truth about the nature of absolute power. Genghis Khan's brutal laws and sexual policies weren't the products of primitive barbarism or uncontrolled violence. They were the calculated innovations of a ruler who understood that true dominion required control over the most intimate aspects of human existence. His empire didn't just conquer territories and accumulate wealth. It systematically rewrote the genetic code of entire civilizations through violence so methodical that its effects can still be traced in the DNA of millions of people today. The Yasa and its sexual provisions remind us that law can become the most sophisticated instrument of oppression ever devised by human minds. When legal systems serve absolute power rather than justice, they transform the most private moments of human life into extensions of political control. The bedroom becomes another battlefield, bodies become currency, and reproduction becomes a weapon of war. Perhaps most chilling of all is the recognition that these weren't the actions of madmen or monsters, but of rational administrators who understood exactly what they were doing and why. Their success in building the largest land empire in human history stands as permanent testimony to the devastating effectiveness of systematic cruelty when it's organized, legalized, and implemented with bureaucratic precision. The genetic legacy of the Mongol Empire lives on in the bloodlines of millions, a biological monument to the power of organized sexual violence to reshape entire populations. In studying these dark chapters of history, we glimpse not just the brutality of the past, but the terrifying potential that lurks within any system that places power above human dignity.